He looked at me in front of his friends, smirked, and said, "Leave if you want. You'll be back begging within a month." Everyone laughed, even my own sister. He thought I was weak, dependent, replaceable. What he didn't know was that I had already made a plan, and 30 days later, I wasn't the one begging. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Storyflow Diaries. I didn't leave him that night because of what he said. I left because of the way everyone else reacted. The laughter is what broke me. It was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel had just been promoted at his firm, and he wanted to show everyone how far we'd come. That's what he said when he invited his friends and family over. I cooked for 2 straight days. His mother's favorite lasagna, his sister's complicated little vegan appetizer bites, even the lemon cake his best friend Mark loved. I wanted everything to be perfect. I always wanted everything to be perfect for him. Because when Daniel was good, he was really good. He was charming, protective, the kind of man who'd hold my hand in public and kiss my forehead like I was the most precious thing in the world. But when he wasn't good, he was cold, and his coldness had a way of making me question my own memory. That night, the house was full. His parents stood near the fireplace, his friends gathered around the kitchen island, and my younger sister, Alina, who had always adored Daniel, hovered close to him like he was some kind of celebrity. I was carrying a tray of drinks when I heard him say it. "Honestly, I don't know what she'd do without me." I froze, just out of sight. Mark laughed. "She'd survive." Daniel scoffed. "No, she wouldn't. Maya's not built like that." The tray felt heavier in my hands. "What do you mean?" my sister asked. "She's sweet," Daniel continued, his tone playful but edged with something sharper. "But she depends on me for everything, financially, emotionally. If she ever tried to leave," he chuckled, "she'd be back begging within a month." And that's when I stepped into the room. He didn't even look embarrassed. He looked entertained. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what are you talking about?" He turned toward me, eyes scanning my face as if I were overreacting already. "Relax, babe, we're joking." "Does it sound like a joke?" I asked. Mark smirked. His sister rolled her eyes. My own sister avoided my gaze. Daniel shrugged and said it again, louder this time. "If you want to leave, leave. You'll be back begging within a month." And they laughed. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable laughter. Real laughter. Even Alina. I don't remember putting the tray down. I don't remember what I said next. I just remember the feeling, like something inside my chest had cracked open. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a clean, quiet split. Because here's the truth. I had sacrificed more than anyone in that room knew. I had left my stable job 2 years earlier when Daniel insisted we move to a new city for his career. "It's temporary," he promised. "Once I'm settled, you can pursue whatever you want." Temporary became permanent. My savings went into furnishing our apartment. My freelance work covered groceries while he waited for bonuses. I handled bills, schedules, appointments, holidays with his family. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up his shining tower, and he had reduced me to a punchline. That night, after everyone left, I asked him why he said it. He sighed like I was exhausting. "Because it's true." The calmness in his voice was worse than if he'd shouted. "You don't even have a job right now, Maya." "I freelance." "Freelance isn't stability." I stared at him. "You told me to quit my job." "You agreed." "You said it was temporary." He rubbed his temples. "Look, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but you rely on me. That's just reality." Reality. I went to bed beside him, but I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment from the past 2 years, every time he'd insisted on handling finances, every time he dismissed my ideas as cute, every time his mother had commented, "It's so nice Daniel takes care of you." Takes care of me. By morning, Something had shifted inside me. I didn't confront him again. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I started observing. Over the next week, I noticed how comfortable he was, how certain. He left his laptop open on the dining table, passwords saved. He discussed investments openly with Mark on speakerphone. He joked again about me not surviving a month alone when his parents visited. And each time, someone laughed, even Alina. My texted sister, who later texted me, "He didn't mean it like that. Don't be dramatic." Don't be dramatic. I began quietly gathering documents, bank statements, copies of our lease, emails from his firm. I reviewed our shared accounts and realized something that made my hands tremble. Most of our money wasn't actually his. When we first moved, he'd asked me to deposit my savings into a joint account for simplicity. I had trusted him. What I didn't realize, I didn't tell anyone about the countdown. Not even the lawyer knew there was a deadline attached to my silence. But every morning when Daniel left for work, I marked another small X on the back page of my planner. 27 days left. 26. 25. The numbers didn't make me anxious. They made me steady. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to him. I was preparing. Daniel, on the other hand, had grown strangely affectionate. It was almost amusing. The more distant I became, the more he tried to pull me back in with charm. Flowers one afternoon, a surprise dinner reservation another. He must have sensed the shift, even if he didn't understand it. "You've been different," he said one evening while we sat on the couch. "Quieter." "Maybe I'm growing," I replied softly. He smiled like that was adorable. "Just don't grow away from me." The irony nearly made me laugh. Meanwhile, I met with my lawyer twice more. I learned words I had never thought I'd need to know. Equity distribution, joint asset withdrawal rights, notice periods. It turned out that because my savings had seeded the joint investment account, I was legally entitled to a significant portion of what it had become, more than enough to start over, more than enough to never beg. The day I saw the exact number in print, my hands trembled again, but not from fear, from disbelief. He had truly convinced himself that everything belonged to him, that I was just attached to it. I began quietly transferring what was legally mine into the new account, small amounts at first, then larger, always documented, always within my rights. I wasn't stealing, I was reclaiming. Around day 22, my sister Alina came over unannounced. She flopped on the kitchen stool like she owned the place. "You've been distant," she said. "Daniel thinks you're still upset about that party." I continued chopping vegetables. "Maybe I am." She sighed dramatically. "Maya, you know how men joke. He didn't mean you're useless." "That's not what he said. You're taking it too seriously." I finally looked at her. "If your boyfriend said you'd come back begging, would you laugh?" She hesitated, just for a second. "It depends on the context." There it was, the loyalty shift. She admired Daniel's success. She liked being invited to his events. I wasn't just her sister anymore. I was the girlfriend of someone powerful, and that mattered more to her than my dignity. "Do you think I could survive without him?" I asked quietly. She studied me like it was a trick question. "It would be hard," she admitted. "You haven't worked a regular job in years." I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She left shortly after, satisfied that she had delivered whatever subtle warning Daniel had likely requested. That night, he asked casually, "What did you and Alina talk about?" "Life," I said, and how interesting it is that people only see what you show them." He frowned slightly, but let it go. Day 18. That was when I discovered something else. An email notification popped up on the tablet we shared. Daniel had forgotten to log out. It was from Mark. The subject line read, "She won't actually leave." I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Mark had written, "You're safe. Maya's comfortable. She won't risk losing this lifestyle. Just keep things steady." Daniel's reply was worse. "I know. She doesn't have the guts." I closed the email and sat there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just absorbing. It wasn't only that he believed I was dependent, he had bet on it, publicly, confidently. That night, he tried to initiate intimacy. I gently moved away. "I'm tired." He studied me carefully. "You're not cheating, are you?" I almost laughed. "Is that what you'd assume?" "You've been distant." "Maybe I'm learning to stand on my own." He smirked. "You don't need to." He still didn't understand that those words no longer sounded protective. They sounded like chains. Day 14, 2 weeks left. I signed the consulting contract officially. Remote work, stable pay, growth potential. My old colleague had said something during our video call that stayed with me. "I always wondered why you left. You were one of our strongest strategists." Strongest, not dependent, not fragile, strongest. I didn't realize how starved I had been for that kind of recognition until I felt it again. Daniel noticed my renewed energy. "You seem happier," he observed. "I am." "Because of me?" I held his gaze. "Because of me." He chuckled like I was joking. Day 10. His mother invited us for brunch again. She brought up marriage once more. "You're not getting any younger, Maya. Stability matters." Daniel squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, Mom. She knows where home is." I met her mother's eyes and smiled gently. "Yes, I do." The certainty in my voice made her blink. On the drive home, Daniel was unusually quiet. "You're acting confident. Is that a problem?" "No," he replied slowly, "just surprising." Day 7, I scheduled the movers. Day 5, I secured a small apartment across town, nothing extravagant, just mine. Day 3, I printed copies of every financial statement and placed them neatly into a folder labeled with my name. I imagined his face when he realized the numbers, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted him to understand. Day 1 arrived quietly. He had no idea. That morning, he kissed my forehead like always. "See you tonight." I smiled back. Maybe. He didn't catch it. That evening, he walked into a half-empty apartment. The couch was gone, my clothes were gone, the framed photos I had chosen were gone. All that remained was the dining table, and on it, the folder and a note. It wasn't long. It simply said, "You told me I'd be back begging within a month. This is day 30. I won't be back." I didn't wait to see his reaction. My phone buzzed repeatedly as I sat in my new apartment surrounded by unopened boxes, calls, messages, missed FaceTime attempts. I let them ring because for the first time in 2 years, the silence belonged to him. And I wondered how long it would take before he realized the person he thought couldn't survive without him had just walked away with half his empire. My phone didn't stop vibrating until well past midnight. I turned it face down on the kitchen counter of my new apartment and let the screen light up the ceiling in pulses. Daniel called 14 times. Mark called twice. Even his mother tried once, which told me he had already gathered his audience. I expected anger. What I didn't expect was the first voicemail he left. His voice wasn't furious, it was confused. "Maya, what is this? Is this some kind of joke? Call me." The second message was sharper. "You can't just empty accounts and disappear." By the fourth, the confidence had thinned. "We need to talk." I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and listened to every word without responding. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. For 2 years, he had dismissed my feelings as dramatic. Now he was feeling the weight of uncertainty, and I needed him to sit in it. The next morning, I finally checked the messages. There were texts from Alina, too. "What did you do? Daniel says you took money. Mom is freaking out." I stared at that last one. Mom is freaking out. Not mom is asking if you're okay, not mom is worried about you, just freaking out. I called my lawyer before I called anyone else. "He's going to accuse me of theft," I said calmly. "He can't," she replied. "You withdrew what was legally yours. Every transaction is documented." Hearing that steadied me. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't emotional. I was prepared. Around noon, Daniel showed up at my new building. I hadn't given him the address, but he knew enough about me to guess the neighborhood. He always did his research when something mattered to him. Apparently, now I mattered again. I opened the door before he could start pounding. He looked different. Not broken, not devastated, just unsettled, like someone who had miscalculated. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "It's me leaving," I said. He ran a hand through his hair. "You took a huge amount of money." "I took my share." "Your share?" He let out a disbelieving laugh. "That was my investment portfolio, seeded by my savings." His mouth opened slightly. He hadn't expected that. "You wouldn't even have known how to invest it." "But I knew how to earn it," I replied quietly. He stared at me like I was a stranger. "This is insane. You're overreacting to a joke." "A joke you repeated. You're proving my point right now. You're being emotional." I felt something almost like pity. "No, Daniel, this is the least emotional decision I've made in years." He walked around the small living room, taking in the modest furniture, the unpacked boxes. "You think you can maintain this?" "Yes." "On what?" I held his gaze. "On my work, on my money, on myself." He scoffed, but there was no humor in it. "You'll burn through it." "Maybe," I said evenly, "but I'll burn through my own resources, not yours." That hit him. He turned sharply. "This is about pride." "No, it's about respect." Silence settled between us, not the comfortable kind, the heavy kind. "You embarrassed me," he finally said. The irony was almost unbearable. "In front of who?" I asked. "Mark? Your mother? The same people who laughed when you humiliated me?" His jaw tightened. "That was different." "Why?" He didn't answer, because there was no answer that didn't expose him. He tried a different angle. His voice softened. "Maya, you know I love you." I believed that he thought he did. "Love doesn't bet on someone's weakness," I said. That stopped him completely. He studied my face, searching for the woman he thought he knew, the one who would fold, apologize, negotiate. She wasn't there anymore. "Come home," he said finally, not commanding, not teasing, almost pleading. "No." The simplicity of my answer unsettled him more than anger ever could. He left without slamming the door. That surprised me. I thought he'd want a dramatic exit. Instead, he walked out slowly, as if trying to understand how the script had flipped. Within hours, the narrative began spreading. Mutual friends texted, some pretending neutrality. There are two sides. Relationships are complicated. Mark called and left a message saying I was making things messy. I noticed none of them questioned his original words, only my reaction to them. That's when I realized something deeper. It wasn't just Daniel who believed I would crawl back. It was all of them. Because my leaving disrupted a comfortable hierarchy. I had been the supportive girlfriend, the accommodating host, the quiet one. My role had made everyone else feel secure in theirs. By stepping out of it, I forced them to reevaluate their own assumptions, and people resist that. A week passed, then another. I immersed myself in work. The consulting contract expanded into a longer-term offer. My old colleague recommended me to another firm. Money began flowing steadily, not extravagantly, but reliably. Each deposit into my account felt like a small affirmation. Meanwhile, I heard through Alina that Daniel had become defensive. He told people I was unstable, that I'd spiraled, that he misunderstood me.
But there was one detail he couldn't erase: the numbers. The financial shift was undeniable. He had lost more than he expected, not enough to ruin him, but enough to bruise his pride. 3 weeks after I left, my mother called me directly. Her voice was tight. "Did you really take half his money?" "I took half of what was legally mine." She exhaled sharply. "People are talking." "They were talking before, too. This makes you look greedy." I closed my eyes briefly. When he said I'd be begging within a month, did that make him look cruel? She didn't answer. Silence has a way of revealing loyalties. The month mark approached quietly. Day 28 since I walked out, day 29. On day 30, I woke up alone in my small apartment and made coffee in a chipped mug I had brought myself. No one laughed, no one smirked, no one predicted my failure. My phone buzzed once, a single text from Daniel. "Are you coming back?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "No." Then I turned the phone off, because he had given me a deadline, and I had met it, just not the way he expected.
The silence after I sent that single word, no, felt different from the silence I had lived in before. Before, it had been heavy and suffocating, like I was shrinking inside it. Now, it felt open, expansive, like air after a storm. Daniel didn't respond immediately. That unsettled me more than anger would have. I had prepared for rage, for accusations, for dramatic ultimatums, but quiet meant recalculation, and Daniel was very good at recalculating. 3 days later, the first ripple hit. Mark posted a photo on social media, him and Daniel at a rooftop bar, drinks raised, captioned, "Some upgrades are necessary." It didn't tag anyone, but the implication was obvious. Comments poured in, inside jokes, subtle digs. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I told myself I didn't care, but humiliation has layers. Even when you leave, even when you win, there's still a sting in seeing yourself turned into a narrative. My sister called that night. Her tone was hesitant. "You've seen the post." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "He's just trying to move on." "So am I." She paused. "He's been telling people you blindsided him." I let out a soft laugh. "Did he mention the part where he said I'd come back begging?" "He says that was taken out of context." "Of course he did. Context is a convenient shield." "Alina," I said gently, "when everyone laughed that night, did you think it was funny?" Silence. Then quietly, "I didn't want to cause tension." That was the first honest thing she'd said. "So you laughed instead." "I didn't think you'd actually leave." There it was again, the shared assumption. I wasn't supposed to act. I was supposed to absorb. After we hung up, I sat with that realization. They hadn't believed I was incapable. They had believed I was unwilling. There's a difference, and that difference is power. A week later, Daniel showed up in my office building. Not my apartment this time, my office. That meant he had asked around. It meant he was paying attention. I met him downstairs in the lobby, unwilling to let him step into the space I was rebuilding for myself. He looked polished, composed, but there were shadows under his eyes. "You're really doing this," he said, as if the weeks apart had still not convinced him. "Yes." "You've made your point." "This isn't about a point." He studied me carefully. "You're punishing me." I shook my head. "I'm protecting myself." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You embarrassed me financially." The wording was precise, not emotionally, financially. "You underestimated me financially," I corrected. His jaw tightened. "Mark says you've always been calculating." I almost smiled. "Mark says a lot of things." "You planned this." "After you told me I couldn't survive." He ran a hand over his face. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel didn't have a polished answer ready.
That unsettled him more than anything. "You're different," he said finally. "No," I replied softly. "I'm the same. You just never looked closely." He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. That small movement shifted something between us permanently. He wasn't used to rejection, especially not from me. "What do you want?" he asked. It sounded almost sincere. I thought about it. Revenge? No. Apology? Too small. "I want you to understand that I was never dependent," I said. "I chose you." He inhaled sharply. "So this is about ego." "No," I said again calmly. "It's about choice." I had chosen to move cities, chosen to merge finances, chosen to support his career. Choice implies power. Dependence implies weakness. He had rewritten our history to make himself the hero. My leaving rewrote it back. That evening, I received an email from his mother, polite, carefully worded. She wanted to clear misunderstandings. I almost ignored it, but something in me wanted closure, not reconciliation, but clarity. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe 2 days later. She arrived dressed elegantly, posture straight, expression measured. "You know I hope we can speak as adults," she began. "Of course." She stirred her tea slowly. "Daniel feels betrayed." I held her gaze. I felt humiliated. She sighed. "Men sometimes exaggerate." "In private?" I asked gently, "or in front of an audience?" That made her pause. "You're always sensitive." There it was, the soft dismissal disguised as concern. "And Daniel has always been confident. Confidence without accountability becomes arrogance." She studied me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You've changed." "I've grown." She set her spoon down. "If you come back, this can all be smoothed over." The offer was almost businesslike, reputation management, social repair. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "If I come back," I said quietly, "what changes?" She didn't answer immediately because she knew the truth. "Nothing." "You'd have stability," she finally said. I smiled softly. "I already do." That conversation ended without drama, but I walked away understanding something deeper. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me that made them comfortable. Meanwhile, work continued to expand. My name began appearing in industry emails again, invitations to collaborate, requests for consultation, each opportunity layered over the fragile doubt Daniel had once planted in me. One evening, about 2 months after I left, I ran into Mark at a networking event. He looked surprised to see me there, not socially, but professionally. "Didn't know you were still in the game," he said, tone casual but eyes sharp. "I never left," I replied. He shifted slightly. "Daniel says you're struggling." "Does he?" I smiled politely. "Interesting." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in his expression. Narratives crumble when confronted with reality. Later that night, Daniel called again. I answered this time. "Mark said you were at the hen."
The first time Daniel said, "You really don't need me," I heard something unfamiliar in his voice. It wasn't pride. It wasn't sarcasm. It was fear. Not fear of losing me emotionally, but fear of losing control of the narrative he had built around us. For years, he had introduced me as Maya. She freelances from home, with that slight shrug that made it sound like a hobby. Now people were beginning to introduce me differently. Maya? She's consulting with Henderson and Gray. The shift was subtle, but in circles that valued status, subtle was everything. Word travels fast in professional networks, especially when it disrupts an assumption. Within weeks, I began noticing a change in how people spoke to me at events. They asked about strategy, about expansion, about market projections. They didn't ask how Daniel was. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't an accessory. I was the main conversation. That change didn't go unnoticed by Daniel. He called again one evening, but this time his tone was softer, almost reflective. "Can we talk somewhere neutral?" he asked. I hesitated. Why? Because I think we both deserve closure. Closure. The word felt heavy, but I agreed to meet him at a quiet park halfway between our old apartment and my new one, a symbolic middle ground. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting on a bench with his hands clasped tightly together. He looked composed, but not confident. "You look good," he said as I approached. "So do you." We sat with a careful distance between us. "I've been thinking," he began. "About what?" "About how I let things get distorted." That word surprised me. Distorted how? He exhaled slowly. "I built my success around the idea that I was self-made. It felt powerful, and somewhere along the way I minimized your contribution because acknowledging it meant sharing that power." I studied him carefully. He wasn't deflecting, he was dissecting. "Why say it publicly?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "Because my friends admire dominance, strength. I thought if I positioned you as dependent, it made me look stronger." The honesty was uncomfortable. "And did it?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "At the time, yes." There it was, the truth stripped of excuses. "You didn't just underestimate me," I said. "You needed to." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." The wind moved softly through the trees around us. There was no dramatic music, no raised voices, just two people sitting with the aftermath of ego. "You hurt me," I said calmly, "not because of the money, not because of the joke, but because you believed I'd crawl back." He closed his eyes briefly. "I thought you loved me enough to forgive anything." Love without respect becomes submission, and I'm not submissive. That silence again, but this time it wasn't defensive, it was reflective. "I told Mark you'd be back," he admitted. "I told everyone." "I know." His head snapped up slightly. "You know?" I read the email. Color drained from his face. "You went through my—" It was open, saved. I didn't hack anything. He leaned back slowly. "So you were planning even then?" "No," I said softly. "I was deciding. There's a difference between plotting revenge and choosing dignity." He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. "When you left, I wasn't angry about the money," he said. "I was angry because I lost control." The clarity of that statement hung between us. I appreciated it even if it came late. "And now?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "Now I'm embarrassed." That word carried weight, real weight. Embarrassed because people know I was wrong, because you didn't beg, because you're doing better than I predicted. I nodded. Predictions based on ego rarely age well. A faint, reluctant smile touched his lips. "You've changed." "No," I said again gently. "I've stopped shrinking." That hit deeper than any accusation could have. He inhaled slowly. "I don't expect you to come back," he said, "but I needed you to know I was wrong." The apology wasn't dramatic, it wasn't tearful, but it was sincere, and strangely that made it heavier. I searched myself for anger, for resentment. I found traces, but they weren't consuming anymore. They were fading. "I accept that," I said, "but accepting doesn't mean returning." He nodded. "I know." We sat there a little longer, two versions of a story that had ended, not in flames, not in destruction, but in clarity. Before I stood to leave, he spoke again. "You were never weak." I paused. "I know." And for the first time, saying that didn't feel defensive, it felt factual. As I walked away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. There's a difference. Victory implies someone loses. Steadiness means you found balance. In the weeks that followed, the social tension slowly dissolved. Mark stopped posting subtle digs. Daniel's mother stopped sending careful messages. Even Alina began to soften. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment with coffee and an awkward smile. "I'm sorry," she said without prompting, "for laughing." I let her inside. "Why now?" I asked gently.
because I realized I was afraid too, afraid that if you left and succeeded, it meant I was settling in my own life. That honesty surprised me. Growth often spreads quietly. You don't have to settle, I told her. She nodded slowly, absorbing that possibility. That night, alone in my apartment, I stood by the window overlooking the city lights. 2 months ago,
There's a strange quiet that settles in after the storm passes. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind with thunder still rumbling in the distance. I mean the ordinary quiet, the kind where you wake up and make coffee and realize no one is questioning your choices. No one is measuring your worth against their own ego. That quiet became my new normal. 3 months after I left Daniel, my life didn't look extravagant. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. My mornings began with emails from clients instead of tension in my chest. My evenings ended with planning sessions instead of subtle power struggles disguised as jokes. I didn't realize how much emotional energy I had been spending managing someone else's perception of me until I stopped. Work continued to grow. Henderson and Gray extended my contract into a partnership trial period. The first time I saw my name included in a strategy memo circulated to executives, I stared at it longer than necessary. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was undeniable. It was tangible proof that I was not a side character in someone else's success story. Around that same time, an unexpected invitation arrived. Daniel's firm was hosting a large networking gala. My current consulting partner would be attending, and my name was on the guest list, not as Daniel's +1, but as an independent consultant. I considered declining. Part of me wanted to avoid the discomfort, but another part, the part that had grown stronger these past months, knew I needed to walk into that room on my own terms. The night of the gala, I chose a simple black dress. Nothing dramatic, nothing designed to provoke reaction, just elegant and calm. When I entered the venue, I felt eyes on me almost immediately. Not judgmental, curious. Whispers have a different tone than laughter. I spotted Daniel across the room before he saw me. He was speaking with a small group, posture straight, expression controlled. Mark stood beside him. When Daniel finally turned and noticed me, I saw the flicker in his eyes. Surprise. Then something else. Respect. He excused himself from the group and approached slowly. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "Neither did I replied lightly. "Until recently." He nodded. "You look confident." I smiled slightly. "I am." There was no tension in my voice, no attempt to prove anything. That seemed to disarm him more than confrontation ever had. Mark joined us a moment later. His usual smirk was absent. "Maya," he said carefully, "didn't expect to see you here." "Business is full of surprises," I replied. He shifted his weight, clearly recalibrating the old dynamic. Conversations moved around us. People began greeting me directly, asking about projects, referencing my recent work. Daniel stood there as I answered questions, watching quietly, not interrupting, not claiming, just observing. At one point, an executive I had worked with shook my hand and said, "We're impressed with your independent expansion. Takes courage to pivot like that." I felt Daniel's eyes on me when I responded, "Sometimes pivots aren't about courage, they're about clarity." Later in the evening, Daniel found me alone near the balcony overlooking the city. "I owe you something else," he said quietly. I looked at him. "What's that?" "Acknowledgement." He leaned against the railing, not too close. "I told people you were unstable because it was easier than admitting I was wrong." The honesty didn't shock me anymore. It felt like a natural continuation of his earlier reflection. "Have you corrected that?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes." "Why?" "Because watching you succeed forced me to confront myself." That sentence carried weight. Not romantic weight, personal weight.
Growth doesn't always come wrapped in redemption arcs. Sometimes it's just uncomfortable self-awareness. I never wanted to destroy you, I said. I know. He paused. You just wanted to prove you didn't need me. I considered that. No, I corrected gently. I wanted to prove I didn't need permission. That difference mattered. He absorbed it slowly. Do you hate me? He asked after a moment. The question surprised me. I searched for resentment and found only distance. No, I said honestly, I outgrew you. He nodded once, accepting it without defensiveness. That might have been the most mature moment we ever shared. As the night went on, I realized something profound. The power dynamic had dissolved completely, not because I had taken money, not because I had left dramatically, but because I no longer needed validation from him or his circle. Independence changes posture, it changes tone, it changes the way you occupy space in a room, and people feel that shift before they understand it. When the event ended, Daniel walked me to the exit. You were never going to beg, were you? He asked quietly. I met his eyes. No. A faint, almost embarrassed smile crossed his face. I really believed you would. I know. He hesitated. That says more about me than it ever did about you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Outside, the cool night air felt sharp and clean. As I stepped toward the waiting car, he spoke one last time. Thank you, he said. I turned slightly. For what? For not shrinking. I held his gaze for a second longer. You're welcome. And I meant it. Not because I owed him growth, but because his underestimation had forced me to rediscover myself. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages from colleagues praising my presentation at the gala. None of them mentioned Daniel. None of them referenced the past. The narrative had shifted fully. Later that afternoon, Alina came by again. She looked thoughtful. I saw photos from last night, she said. You looked different. How? Grounded. I smiled softly. That's what happens when you stop performing for approval. She sat quietly for a moment. Do you regret leaving? I considered the question carefully. Regret is complicated. It assumes loss outweighs gain. No, I said finally. I regret staying.
The strange thing about reclaiming your power is that life doesn't suddenly become dramatic or cinematic. There's no swelling music, no applause. Just small, steady days that slowly rebuild your sense of self. 4 months after I walked out of that apartment, the story people told about me had shifted completely. I was no longer Daniel's girlfriend who freelances. I was Maya, the consultant who expanded Henderson's West Coast strategy. It sounds subtle, but identity is everything. When people change the way they introduce you, they change the way they see you. And eventually, you change the way you see yourself. Daniel and I didn't speak much after the gala. There were no late-night confessions, no attempts to rekindle what we had. Whatever we shared had been rooted in imbalance, and once that imbalance disappeared, so did the illusion. But something else happened, something I hadn't anticipated. The friends who once laughed began reaching out quietly, not to apologize loudly, not to make public statements, but to ask questions. Mark called one afternoon under the pretense of industry advice. I almost didn't answer, but I did. I underestimated you, he admitted bluntly after a few minutes of small talk. I didn't rush to respond. Silence makes people reveal more. Daniel always framed you as comfortable, he continued, content to ride along. I wasn't riding, I said calmly. I was building. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, I see that now. What struck me wasn't his admission, it was the pattern. People often align themselves with confidence, not truth. When Daniel projected certainty about my dependence, they followed his lead. When I projected certainty about my independence, they recalibrated just as quickly. That realization freed me in a way nothing else had. It meant their opinions were never about my capability, they were about proximity to power. Around that time, something even more unexpected happened. Daniel's firm announced internal restructuring, nothing catastrophic, but enough that whispers began circulating about leadership tensions. For the first time, his position wasn't untouchable. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't invincible either. And strangely, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt perspective, because I finally understood that his need to appear dominant had always been rooted in insecurity. Control was his armor. The night he said I'd come back begging, he wasn't proving my weakness. He was shielding his own fear of irrelevance. I saw that clearly now. One evening, about 5 months after I left, Daniel asked to meet again. I almost declined, but curiosity won. We met at a quiet cafe, not unlike the one where I had once sat across from his mother. He looked different this time, not shaken, not arrogant, just grounded. "I wanted to tell you something in person," he said. I waited. I stepped down from leading the investment division. That surprised me. Why? Because I realized I was managing perception more than substance. He gave a small, self-aware smile. "You forced me to look at that." I didn't respond immediately. Growth deserves acknowledgement, but not ownership. "That was your choice," I said. "Yes," he agreed, "but your leaving triggered it." We sat with that for a moment. The air between us wasn't tense anymore. It was neutral, honest. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't said those words?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. I probably would have stayed, longer than I should have. He nodded slowly. "So I did you a favor." I raised an eyebrow. He laughed softly. "I'm kidding." For the first time, his humor didn't carry an edge. "No," I said gently, "you revealed something, and once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it." He looked at me thoughtfully. "You're not angry anymore." "No." "Why?" I thought about that deeply before answering. Because anger requires attachment, and I'm no longer attached to the version of myself that tolerated it. That landed. We didn't talk much longer. There was nothing left to dissect, no lingering what if, just two people who had shared a chapter and grown in opposite directions. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt something settle completely. Not closure, not triumph, just peace. Later that week, my mother called. Her voice was softer than it had been months ago. "I didn't understand at first," she admitted. "I thought you were throwing stability away." "I know, but I see you now." Those words meant more than she probably realized. Being seen without explanation, that's rare. "You seem steady," she added. I smiled. "I am." Stability doesn't always look like a shared mortgage or a public relationship. Sometimes it looks like waking up without fear of being diminished. 6 months ago, I had questioned whether I could survive alone, not because I lacked skill, but because I had internalized someone else's narrative about my limits. Now, I understood something unshakable. Independence isn't loud, it's quiet, it's consistent. It's the ability to choose yourself without spectacle. And here's the truth no one talks about. Daniel wasn't the villain in some dramatic fairy tale. He was a man shaped by a culture that equated dominance with worth. I wasn't his victim, I was his mirror. And when I refused to reflect weakness back to him, the entire structure cracked. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you're being underestimated, pay attention. Not to their words, to your reaction. If something inside you feels smaller every time they speak, that's not love, that's erosion. And erosion happens slowly until one day you barely recognize yourself. The night he said, "You'll be back begging within a month," he believed he was predicting my future. What he was actually doing was revealing his own limitations, because people who truly respect you don't predict your collapse, they prepare for your rise. And I rose.
Not to spite him, not to prove a point to his friends, but to prove to myself that I was never dependent. I was choosing. And when you remember that you're choosing, everything changes.
There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need witnesses. It just exists. Steady, rooted, unshaken. That's where I found myself nearly a year after the night Daniel laughed and told everyone I'd come back begging. If someone had told me back then that those humiliating words would become the turning point of my life, I wouldn't have believed them. Pain rarely looks like opportunity when you're standing inside it. It looks like embarrassment, like rejection, like proof that maybe the doubts you've carried are true. But what I learned is this. Humiliation only has power if you accept the role it assigns you, and I refused that role. Not immediately, not perfectly, but eventually, completely. A year later, I stood in a conference room presenting a long-term strategy proposal to a room full of executives. My voice didn't shake. My posture didn't fold inward. I wasn't thinking about Daniel. I wasn't thinking about proving anyone wrong. I was thinking about the work, about the vision, about the numbers lining up cleanly on the screen behind me. When the presentation ended, the room didn't erupt in dramatic applause. It didn't need to. One of the senior partners simply nodded and said, "Excellent work, Maya. We'd like you to lead this." Lead this. Those two words meant more than any apology ever could. Later that evening, as I walked home through the city lights, I realized something almost startling. I hadn't thought about that party in months. The laughter that once echoed in my mind like a bruise had faded into something distant, not erased, but neutral. That's the real closure people don't talk about. It's not confrontation. It's not revenge. It's indifference. A few weeks later, I ran into Daniel unexpectedly at a bookstore downtown, of all places. He was flipping through a business leadership book, irony almost poetic. When he looked up and saw me, there was no tension in his expression, just recognition. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." We stood there, two people who once built a life together, now separated by growth rather than anger. "You look well," he said. "I am." He nodded slowly. "I heard about your promotion." "News travels." "It does." There was a brief pause, but it wasn't awkward. It was reflective. "I was wrong about you," he said finally. Not dramatic, not defensive, just factual. "Yes," I replied gently. We both smiled at that, not sarcastically, but honestly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this year about ego, about what strength actually looks like." I tilted my head slightly. "And what does it look like?" He exhaled softly. "Not what I thought." I appreciated that answer. Growth doesn't always need a speech. Sometimes it just needs humility. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. Because here's another truth no one tells you. When you outgrow someone, you don't need them to stay small. You just need them to stop shrinking you. We spoke a few minutes longer about work, about family, about ordinary things. There was no suggestion of reconciliation, no lingering romantic tension. What we had belonged to a different version of us, and that version had served its purpose. As I left the bookstore, I felt something settle fully into place. Not triumph, not regret, completion. That night I called my sister. "Remember when you said it would be hard for me alone?" I asked lightly. She groaned softly. "Don't remind me." I laughed. "I'm not saying it to prove anything." "Then why?" she asked. "Because it's important to acknowledge growth, yours and mine." She was quiet for a moment. "You changed more than just your life," she admitted. "You changed how I see mine." That might have been the most unexpected impact of all. When one person refuses to accept limitation, it gives others permission to question theirs. If I could leave something that diminished me and build something steady on my own, maybe she could too. Maybe anyone could. That's the ripple effect of dignity. It doesn't just free you, it quietly challenges everyone watching. Sometimes people ask me now, rarely, but occasionally, if I ever wanted to go back, if I ever missed the comfort, the shared routines, the familiar weight of someone else beside me at night. And the honest answer is this: I miss the idea of what I hoped we could be. But I never miss the version of myself who felt small. That's the difference between loneliness and self-betrayal. Loneliness passes, self-betrayal lingers. The night Daniel said I'd be back begging within a month, he thought he was predicting my dependence. What he actually did was expose his own insecurity, and in doing so, he handed me the clearest mirror I'd ever been given. I could accept his version of me or define my own. I chose the latter, not because I'm extraordinary, not because I'm fearless, but because there comes a moment in every life when you realize that staying would cost you more than leaving ever could. And once you see that clearly, the fear of walking away becomes smaller than the fear of remaining diminished. If you're listening to this and someone has ever told you that you wouldn't survive without them, pause. Ask yourself, is that love speaking or control? Because love prepares you for independence, control prepares you for collapse. The most